This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Sports Spectrum. My name is Jason Romano, and we appreciate you tuning in and checking us out today. We got a great show with Brian Dickinson, one of the craziest stories you will ever hear. I mean, it's a made-for-TV, made-for-a-movie type of story from Brian Dickinson, and we'll tell that story in just a little bit. Before we do that, I want to tell you a couple ways that you can get in touch with us. First, our website, sportspectrum.com. Great place to tune in every single day on the web and on your phone. Check out all the articles and devotionals and podcasts that live right at our website, sportspectrum.com. You can sign up for our weekly email as well. Great place to bookmark and check out each and every day, sportspectrum.com. And then my email address, you can reach me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. That's my email address, jason@sportspectrum.com. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you have a thought on today's interview with Brian Dickinson and his story, or you have a story of your own that you want to share, or a guest idea. You can email me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. Today's show is presented by Compassion International. They are the most trusted child development ministry in the world, and right now they are doing an amazing work with Fill the Stadium. It's an initiative that they're doing with pro athletes, which I'll tell you a little bit about more later in the podcast. But right now, it's a dire situation for kids around the world. Basic needs like food, clean water, and education are not happening right now because of the pandemic. And this past year has just been really hard on a lot of kids. And so Compassion has teamed up with pro athletes and Sports Spectrum to help fill the stadium. You can learn more right now by going to fillthestadium.com. Fillthestadium.com. We're also presented today by Water Mission, and the work that they do is so awesome. I mean, they are a nonprofit Christian engineering ministry fighting the global water crisis with safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions in developing countries and disaster areas. And really, a disaster area in 2020 is the entire earth with COVID-19. And so Water Mission has really worked right now to stop that global spread of COVID-19 with these urgently needed safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions. You can learn more. You can pray with them and donate by going to watermission.org, joining Water Mission to fight the global water crisis. watermission.org. Today on Sports Spectrum, we bring to you the incredible story of Brian Dickinson. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's an adventurer, he's a mountaineerer. He's got a lot of titles, but really what he is a very brave human being. This man soloed the summit of Mount Everest. That's right, soloed the summit of Mount Everest. When I say solo, that means he went by himself. He holds the record for the highest solo blind descent, which we'll explain during the show. He's climbed the seven summits, listen to this. He's climbed the seven summits, climbing the highest peaks of all 7 continents. He also spent 6 years in the United States Navy as a special operations air rescue swimmer and did two tours in the Gulf as part of Operation Southern Watch. He's been featured on CNN, Good Morning America, the Huffington Post, 700 Club, and more. And he wrote a book about his incredible story. It's called Blind Descent, and it released in 2014. Brian Dickinson's the guest. What a story he has. He shouldn't even be alive. By God's grace and a lot of crazy things that transpired, he joins us here today to tell us his incredible story. Take a listen to Brian Dickinson on Sports Spectrum. Brian Dickinson, welcome to Sports Spectrum. How are you, sir?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good, man. So good to have you here on the show today. Your story's a crazy one. And just the one that calls you adventurer, I think that's such an interesting sort of moniker or title that somebody gives you. Describe adventure in the Brian Dickinson landscape of what exactly that means, and kind of, we're going to get deep into the story in a minute, and the Mount Everest story and blind descent and all this amazing things that God has worked through you to experience. But describe that title, adventure.
Adventure. Yeah, I think it's when you I think adventure comes into play when you don't know how else to describe someone. So it's kind of that catch-all. We'll just make an adventure because you end up doing like lots of adventurous things. I think even when I was Navy, I spent 6 years in the U.S. Navy as a helicopter rescue swimmer. So I was very adventurous. When I got out, I was trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to do as I was in grad school and got into mountaineering. But, mountaineering can mean a lot of different things. As far as like it can be hiking up to highly glaciated peaks, to rappelling, to cross training with mountain biking and adventure racing. So I think in the end, I do a lot of outdoor adventures.
Is that something that just when you were 5, 10 years old, that is like, is that something you strive to do, I guess, when you were a little kid?
Yeah, I think it's just how God wired me. I grew up, mainly my childhood was in the 80s, so I didn't have all distractions that kids have today with devices. And growing up in Southern Oregon in the mountains, it didn't matter how bad the weather was. My parents would just be like, get outside, go do something. So I was kind of forced to get creative, be adventurous, take my dog and go for a hike or create an obstacle course on the side of a mountain. And, just fortunate to be alive to have survived the 80s for some of the stuff I did back then.
Isn't it funny? Because we're the same age, and just thinking about growing up in the 80s. And I don't want to be the old fart that says, oh, those were the good old days. I don't want to be that guy necessarily, because technology is allowing you and I to record an interview right now. But it was a lot simpler, I feel like, back in the 80s as a kid than watching. I don't know if you have children, but I have a daughter. She's 16, and we kind of force her to try and experience just the simple things like going out into nature and going out and playing with your friends, as opposed to just being sucked into your device. Seems like it was a different time, right?
It was. I have a 16-year-old daughter as well, and a 14-year-old son. And I think so my wife's a Christian counselor. We could not be more opposite. And I think she's scared of heights and she loves adventure and everything, but, she has her boundaries she works within. And then I push a little beyond those. But having kids in the middle of that, I think is kind of cool, because my wife and I have made it work, and, we're happily married, but we've also made it work with the children so that, they're a balance between the two of us. So, yeah, and I think it's so important to throw those devices down, get off the grid to where you don't have a connection. If you're going to bring them with you, bring it purely to take pictures, because it's a lightweight camera now, better than some of the heavyweight cameras you can bring. But getting our kids out and just experiencing, it's not necessarily what you and I had, because the times were better way back then, but just being outside of the norm. And today the norm is it's have your device and you look around and everyone's just staring at their devices, and I would say antisocial, but I guess they're just social in a different way now. But I don't know, it's so different. So I think it is important to kind of force that away from them, allow them to be different, because I think that's going to round them out a little bit better.
So take us to May 15th, 2011. That's the story, the summit of Mount Everest. Tell us, leading up to it, what brought you there, I guess, and the idea of going there and soloing it, by the way, on your own. And then we'll get into what transpired.
Sure. So so after the Navy, moved up to the Seattle area for grad school, and just needed some adventure in my life. Mount Rainier, 14,000 foot, highly glaciated peak. It's here in my backyard, so got into mountaineering. Decided to kick it up a little bit, kind of a goal setter, and decided to climb the highest peaks on the 7 continents. So, not a ton of people have done that. So I just figure that's an audacious goal. that aligns with my my
that's not a small goal, Brian. That's kind of a big goal, right?
Yeah. It's always small when you start it. And then when you start really calculating everything, it's like, there's a lot we can do with this. So not only, am I training hard for it, filling in the gaps in my skills and my portfolio of mountains to climb around the world, but I also used it as an opportunity to visit orphanages and, deliver toys in all these, underserved areas of the world. So just kind of gave it a bump of like a more meaningful purpose. So it's kind of cool. And actually my wife and kids actually got to go to an orphanage down in Argentina. And so that was cool just to see them when they were like tiny, giving out toys, interacting and everything.
That's seed planting, right?
Yeah, there you go.
A lot of ways.
But yeah, so Everest obviously is the highest mountain in the world. It's the highest in Asia. So that was part of it. And it was, I think, my 4th mountain on the list. And yeah, so in 2011, headed there, and, you know, just about Mount Everest, it's 29,035 feet. So, you know, almost 30,000 feet, same elevation that airplanes cruise at. Takes about 2 months to climb because you have to acclimate. You know, if you pluck your body from at sea level, put you on the top, you just pass out and die.
Yeah.
So you have to climb high, sleep low. So just to get to base camp at 17,500 feet, it takes about a week and a half. So it's a long journey. And then you start heading up through like the Khumbu ice fall, this area that has building size blocks of ice that are constantly falling. And that's where you see the aluminum ladders tied together. Probably seen those. So it's a process. It takes about a month just to acclimate. And that's where you climb high, sleep low. It forces your body into oxygen deprived areas, which forces your body to produce red blood cells, which carry more oxygen. So then slowly, you can, you know, survive higher up. And then at about 23,000 feet, start using supplemental oxygen. So where it mixes with the outside air and just, you know, helps keep you alive a little bit better. So yeah, it's a long process. It's a definite commitment. And I went independent. You mentioned solo. I wasn't intending to solo. I had a Sherpa friend I was climbing with and some support down lower. But things kind of changed as we got higher on the mountain.
So let me ask you about preparing for that. You said, you actually mentioned the word training, which, you know, a lot of athletes listen to this show and they know about training, right? You train for, you know, a marathon, you train for, you know, an off season to get ready for a season, whether it's baseball or football or basketball. How do you train for something like this? It's not like you have another 29,000 foot mountain that you can kind of practice on before you go to Mount Everest. So what does training look like?
Yeah, that's a good point. And you really can't train for the oxygen deprivation. So like anything in life though, right? You train for the things that are within your control. And then you have to have that ability to respond to things when they are outside of your control. So really for mountaineering, it's a lifestyle. It's not something you just, you know, today I'm going to go do this, because you get crushed. You're carrying 60 plus pounds, you know, all the gear that you're wearing, the spikes on your boots, you know, harness, you know, full down suit, oxygen, carrying those bottles, which are heavy. So you definitely I have a lot of strength training. I have, you know, outside my house, I have 4,000, 5,000 foot peaks. So, you know, like usually 8 to 10 mile round trip. So I can wake up early, you know, headlamp on, throw, you know, 60 pounds of water weight in a pack, go hit a mountain, dump it at the top, you know, save the knees for the descent, come down and, you know, grab a Starbucks and wake up the family. So, there's
just your typical training, right, Brian?
Yeah.
So when you're preparing, because you say it takes a while to get there, a week or two, and then really a month, I think you said, to get up to the top. So you're out there the whole time. Are you sleeping outside and tenting and all of that? Forgive me, because I don't mountaineer, so I don't even know what that's like.
Yeah. No, it's definitely back to basics. So living in a tent, you know, you bring as much, you know, food as you can handle. So there's support, which are the local people over there. So you hire Sherpa for different aspects of the climb. And, you know, down at base camp, you got cooks, like Sherpa cooks, and they're frying up spam and rice for you. So, I mean, it's
food.
Yeah, you got to survive. And up higher, you're not really hungry as you go higher. So the effects of altitude, you just feel nauseous and headaches. And as you're acclimated, you feel a little bit better, but nothing's ever perfect up there. So you're losing quite a bit of weight as you're moving up. You got to force food down and drink lots of water. And then you come back down to 17,500 feet, which is at base camp. And once you're acclimated to higher, that actually feels like sea level where we're at right now. So it's amazing, the body, just how it will respond and, keep you alive. But then you replenish, get more of the thick air, and eat, gain that weight back, and then start heading back up the mountain.
Brian Dickinson's joining us here on Sports Spectrum. His book is called Blind Descent, which kind of gives away what took place a little bit. A little spoiler alert there with the title, but take us through what happened, because you had the Sherpa mountain guide, and I don't remember if you explained it completely, but that guide became ill, right? So you had to go back to camp, and you're soloing here on your summit to Mount Everest, and then something crazy goes awry, I guess, or happens to you. Can you share with us that story?
Yes. So my friend Pasong Sherpa and I we made it to high camp, which is the highest camp in the world. It's called the Death Zone. Anything. What
a name.
Anything above 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters is the death zone, because there's only a third of the ozone up there. So you just can't survive. If you cut your finger, it won't heal. I mean, you cannot stay in the death zone for long. It's called that for a reason. But it was the two of us this would have been May 14th, 2011. And, we got there. I'd actually had an accident on the way up. So just to get to high camp, it's just a couple miles, just a straight up ice climb from basically 22,000 feet up. There's a camp halfway up at 23,000, and then you head up.
Describe the accident, by the way, Brian. When you say you had an accident, what do you mean?
So while I was heading up, I had to get some water, and I have oxygen mask on, my goggles. So I pulled my goggles off and kind of slipped out, even though I was attached to a rope. So one important note is on Everest and some of these higher mountains, we'll fix lines to anchor points, so that I'm by myself. I have two carabiners in my harness sucked into that rope. So that's why I don't have to be clipped to like other people, like on some other mountains. But I'm on anchor and I slip. My goggles fall. They slip off my hand. They go down, and went down like 500 feet. And some Sherpa that were coming up to a higher camp actually waved. They had stopped the goggles. So I had to come off oxygen. I rappelled down to them. And when I got to them, the goggles were actually cracked. So goggles have two lenses, internal and external lens. The internal was cracked. So nothing I could do. So I put the goggles on, and, you don't bring like extra goggles because you're not going to crack your goggles or anything, but
yeah.
They were freezing between layers. So I'm ripping out the internal lens, not realizing that would cut their effectiveness in half. So fast forward, make it to high camp, and Pasong and I kind of hanging out. We were tracking the weather. We call down, radio down, and they triangulate from like Sweden and Seattle. So the weather system's great these days. Because on Everest, there's only a couple of days that you can actually summit, because it's up there in the, where weather's never good. And they said, yeah, it's going to be good throughout the night. And in the morning, then 50-mile-an-hour winds will kick up the next day. So, okay, great. So when you climb highly glaciated peaks, you climb through the night, because once the sun comes out, they're very unstable. So you have your crampons, the spikes on your boots, and sometimes an ice axe and all the gear. So you want it like bulletproof ice. So about 8 p.m. we start heading up the mountain, and pitch black, got our headlamps on and just kind of cruising up. And I was inching away from him, and we kind of had this rendezvous point at the halfway point at 27,500 feet called the balcony. And I waited there for about an hour, and he finally showed up, and he's like, I'm not feeling good. And I'm like, oh man, do we need to head down? And he's like, no. And he's like, you have some water? I'm like, yeah, water. He throws up. So I'm just like, oh, keep it. And he's like, no, let's keep going. I'm like, are you sure? So it's tough, because you have these conversations up in the death zone, and you kind of in that moment, you live and die by these decisions. So he had already had 3 summits. So strong guy, young guy. So we continued, got to 28,000 feet, and he tapped out. He's like, I'm going to go back to the balcony, which is close to where we were. I'm going to wait you. He's like, you should keep going. So that's the big conversation, right? 28,000 feet. We're the only 2 people going for the summit, which is on either side. So you can summit from the south or the north. We're on the south, the Nepalese side. And I had to weigh out things. How was the weather? The weather's good. How was I feeling? I was feeling really, really strong. Most importantly, how was Pasong? Could he get back to the balcony? I mean, he could. And he, put an extra oxygen bottle, a spare bottle, in the snow right there. And he started heading down, and I started heading up. This kind of pivotal moment. Right at that point is this rock climb. So the South Rock Step. So like level would be just kind of like free climb up with spikes on your boots in the death zone where every step takes like 5 seconds. There's just not enough air. You just cannot move. It was a lot, but made it to the top as the sun was rising. And I have cool videos out there of it. It was the last video I made because my camera was, but it was the sun rising, behind the highest point in the world, casting the perfect pyramid shadow down over the Himalayas. So I'm the highest person in the world. And, saw that, and it was just a moment of just, one of those moments that you just never forget. But moving. So stuff away, continued up, got to the South Summit, and then you actually drop down. So it's kind of humiliating. And then you climb back up, and it takes about an hour from there. And there's one right before the summit. It's about 2 feet wide. And on each side of you, it is a 2-mile drop. 2 miles on the right into Tibet, 2 miles on the left into Nepal. So you have options. But I kept going, got those last few steps just all choked up, and it's a crazy experience. It's something that I'll replay forever. Not just to stand on top of the world, but to be, according to the Himalayan data, one of 2 people to ever have it completely to myself a day. And unplanned. It was just an amazing moment to be there.
Today on Sports Spectrum, we are presented by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And this past spring, most of the events that Compassion International relies on to help sponsor children in crisis were canceled due to the pandemic, leaving 70,000 kids in desperate need of help. So Compassion International is partnering with professional athletes to help kids in poverty all around the world, meeting basic needs like food, clean water, and education, so they can not only survive, but reach their full potential. And right now, because of COVID, children around the world are living in poverty, and the issue of food has gone from being hungry to starvation. The pandemic has magnified their needs, and they are in crisis. We talked about 70,000 kids in desperate need. Well, that also happens to be the average size of many pro football stadiums that were once filled and now sit mostly empty. And each of the 70,000 empty seats, think about this, represents a child in crisis who needs your help, who needs our help to step up and fill the stadium. So that's what we're doing. We're working with Compassion to fill the stadium to help children in crisis. You can join right now by going to fillthestadium.com. That's the new website, fillthestadium.com. You can click right there. You can give, and it's actually a great way to partner. Maybe you have a team of people, whether it's a high school team or an organization, all can contribute a little, and then you can make one giant donation to release a child from poverty. That is a stadium that cannot remain empty. We want to have you partner with us and join with Compassion right now to fill the stadium to help children in crisis. Again, the website, fillthestadium.com. We're also presented today by Water Mission, and we talk about COVID-19. Water Mission is working to stop the global spread of COVID-19 right now by providing urgently needed safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions to refugee settlements and other vulnerable communities. Listen to a couple of these numbers that were the statistics released right before COVID. 2.1 billion people are lacking access to safe water around the world. That's in the billions. Lacking access to safe water, things that you and I take for granted. And there's people around the world who don't have that. How about this number? 4.4 billion people lacking access to adequate sanitation. 4.4 billion people. Again, things that you and I take for granted every single day. And that's why Water Mission is an important place to sow into because of the work that they're doing fighting the global water crisis. You can learn more right now and pray with them. Heck, even donate, sow into this ministry by going to watermission.org. They're great partners, great sponsors of Sports Spectrum. We believe in their mission. You should too, and you can help right now. Again, pray with them, pray for them, and donate if you can by going to watermission.org to fight the global water crisis. Watermission.org. And Brian, so on your descent down, because you're at this peak and it's amazing that you get up there and you're at this sort of high of highs, right? And this amazing experience. On your way down or on the descent, something goes awry and you go through something that's pretty powerful and it in many ways changes your life forever. It leads to a book. It leads to our conversation. So much takes place. Can you kind of share what happened and all that took place and transpired?
Yeah, of course. So made the top, and you don't have a lot of time to be at the summit of Everest. In the death zone, I'm there completely alone, and maybe have an hour, but that's really pushing it because your body starts shutting down. It's cold, and you just got to take in the views and take some pictures and then start moving. So I made that radio call down to my friend who was down lower and, let him know I was up there. I was by myself. And, he told me, be careful going down, you and Pasong, make sure you're careful. And at that point, I realized no one knew I was up there alone. So I told him, that's cool, but Pasong went down a few hours ago. He's like, you're alone? I'm like, yeah. It's like, okay, well, be careful. Like, okay. So at that point, I talked to him later. He asked Lakba Sherpa, his friend, who he was climbing with, and I'd been climbing with for that first month as I was acclimating. So he knew me. He says, how long is it going to take Brian to get down to high camp? He's like, Brian? And he's like, probably 2 to 3 hours. And they wouldn't hear from me for 7. So I'm up there. I take the high selfie and, do everything that I can, get some water, take a snack, and, really just trying to process it and just not realizing it's something I'd be processing my whole life. And I got to start heading down. And I start moving down, taking in the view, and within a few feet, everything goes completely white. And I went snowblind. So what snow blindness is, it's the sunburning of the cornea. So as soon as the sun rose, banked off the ice, it fried my cornea. And usually it takes about 24 hours to return. I wouldn't get my full eyesight back for about a month and a half. And I remember just at that moment, everything's bright white. So with snow blindness, it's not black, it's white. And it's so bright, you cannot see anything. It's like if you put a light bulb in front of your face, you could move your finger in between your face and the light bulb. You'd know something moved, but it's impossible to focus on your finger. And it hurts. It's like if you break potato chips and put them in your eyelids. I mean, you don't realize how often your eyes flutter until you're blinded. So I don't recommend it. So I remember dropping down, grabbing the rope I was attached to, and just assessing the situation. I remember thinking, I'm at the highest point in the world. I'm completely alone, and I'm blind. Nobody's coming to get me. And without overthinking it, I stood up and I started moving, just slowly and deliberately, feeling my way down, taking a step, making sure I was safe. And just it took a long time. And this whole time, it's just an experience I've never had in my life. But I felt this presence around me. just this peaceful presence. It's like if you're in the room with someone else, you close your eyes, you know they're there. Even if they don't say anything, you have this feeling. And I felt that this whole way down. And I didn't think much about it. It was always there. It was always present. So the first area was that Cornice Traverse, which is the 2-mile drop on each side. And at that point, I'm using my senses. I can hear the wind. These 50-mile-an-hour gusts now are coming up over the ridge. And I would hunker down. It'd sweep over me, and I'd stand back up, and I would take another step. And then eventually made it to the top of Hillary Step, which is a 40-foot rock climb, like the last major obstacle before the summit. And I remember trying to reverse my gear, and I slipped out and pendulum down, like slammed into the rocks. And I remember just laying at the base of it, thinking, assessing my own body. Am I broken? And just controlling my heart rate. And fortunately, I was good, and I got up and I started moving. And, I would take a few steps, and I'd have to like fumble through, get some water, and just keep moving. It's a really slow process. And made it to the south summit, and had a major fall right there. I slipped out, and I'm just head over heels falling down, and the rope that I was attached to shock loaded. It saved my life. I would have fallen, it'd have been game over. I would have fallen for over a mile. I remember my heart just ripping out of my chest, and I had to right myself and just slow my breathing and just stay calm, force any panic out, and just keep moving. And eventually got to where Pasong had turned around, and I almost walked right past the oxygen bottle that he had stashed there, hours earlier. But there was like this bright orange orb that I was walking by, and I remember I stopped and laid down next to it and fumbled with my regulator, tried to get it working, and it just wouldn't work. So for whatever reason, I put the regulator back on my functioning bottle, grabbed that other bottle, which is 15 pounds, put it in my pack, and started moving down. I have still no clue why I did that. Wasn't looking for a bigger workout.
Right.
Eventually got to the balcony where Pasong was supposed to be, and he wasn't. He had went all the way down to high camp, which is totally fine. Like if he was hurting, he needed to get down. But I remember just being happy at this moment. Like I'd made it to this point, and all I had was about 20 pitches of rappel to get to high camp, and then there would be people. And you got a snack, got some water, and then reversed my gear and started heading down. And then about 10, 20 yards into it, my mask just starts collapsing around my face. And I remember just ripping it off. I'd run out of oxygen. And typically at this point, if you run out of oxygen in the death zone, that's not good. You're not going to survive. And I just remember at that moment, I was done. It had been 33 hours from the day prior to this point that I had been climbing all through the night, blind, just completely wrecked. And I remember just dropping to my knees and praying, just saying very simply, God, I can't do this alone. Please help me. And around the world at that time, my wife was prompted to wake up and pray for me. My good friend was prompted that I was going to make it. But I needed help. And there was people that I didn't even know that were prompted to pray for me in that moment. It was just really powerful. I had no clue about any of this until, weeks later. And as soon as I said that simple prayer, I just felt this energy come over me. It was like someone lifted me up to my feet. And the first thing I did is I tried for that other oxygen bottle. I pulled that out, and I got a positive flow. And I just remember taking, 5 deep breaths, and that air just re-entering my body. It was like fire. I mean, it burned. I've never felt anything like this. And without overthinking it, I put all my gear back, and I just started, bombing down the mountain, which is slow motion, super slow. Yeah. But just as carefully as I could, getting down in and out of the anchor points. And And I remember as I got to about the last quarter mile, I was looking out, and I would see like little, like blurry objects. And I thought there were people waving at me, and I would start waving back. And then I would keep moving towards them, and it'd be a rock I'd trip over. I'd be like, stupid rock. And I remember at one point, I thought I died. I'm like, am I dead? Did I die? I'm like, if this is heaven, this sucks. And I remember,
wow.
And it honestly went through my mind. And then out of nowhere, Pasong right then hugs me. He's like, Brian, you alive? And I'm like, whoa, never saw him coming. And, he's like, I'm so sorry I leave you. I'm like, don't worry, dude. And we headed back. He helped me back to the tent where I collapsed in the tent. I gave him my camera. He's looking through pictures and, all excited for me, and mostly excited that I was back and alive. I passed out. I slept for like 15 hours. My eyes were secreting and glued shut, totally swollen, had 2 black eyes, lost 20 pounds just during my summit bid. And then the next day, I still had to get down. I still had to get down Lhotse Face, which is, you climb down the 4th highest mountain in the world, which is just a wall of ice and snow and rock. And, it takes 2 days to actually get down to base camp. Well, on camp 2 was the first time I actually got to call my wife. There was a French-Canadian friend I had down at camp 2 who was making her summit bid. She had a satellite phone. So I had her dial Joanna, my wife's number. And, she had already heard that I'd summited through the Sherpa grapevine. So she's all excited, and there's always a delay on satellite phones. And I'm like, Joanna, I'm blind. Or I soloed the summit, and I'm blind. And then the phone cut out. So I own highest blind descent and worst phone call to spouse in history.
Right.
I couldn't get back to her until the next day when I was in base camp, and had a cell phone down there and talked to her for an hour and just talked through everything. But I'm alive to tell the story for some reason.
My goodness, Brian, that's and I can sense, just hearing you tell it and the emotion that's there. I mean, this is almost 10 years, right? It was May of 2011, and here we are at the end of 2020, and it still hits you just as hard, I'm guessing, as when you probably first started telling people. Why do you think it's, because usually the further removed you are from something, the easier it is maybe to tell. And easy probably isn't the right word, but there's still a lot of emotion that comes back when you share this story. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I don't think it's because I almost died. I think I was prepared for that. I think even while I was up there, I knew 99.9 whatever percent I was not going to survive, but I was going to do everything I could to get down. I had to figure out a reason to take one more step forward to survive. I think the emotion always comes. It's just the power of prayer and just, God, having mercy on me. He didn't have to do that. And, I've had a lot of time to, think about it and retell my story and, cry in front of thousands of people. So
No,
just a big softie, but I think God, he just works in a way. I mean, he was there the whole time. Holy Spirit's following me down. Like, keep trying on your own, dummy. Like, as soon as you reach out to me, I'm going to help you. He's like, oh, you don't want to reach out to me? He's there, hand, outstretched. And at that point, I tried so hard to do it on my own. And I finally reached the point I couldn't.
So a couple questions off of that. You said you climbed the highest peaks of 7 continents, and this was the fourth. Did I hear that right early on? So that means you've gone back and done 3 more after this? This wasn't the last time you ever climbed, obviously. You were crazy enough, if I want to say it, you not using the word crazy, but me, to go back and continue to do these things, right?
Yeah, no, I've been called a lot worse. I think anytime we step out of our comfort zone, you're not a climber. So climbing appears crazy. There's stuff that you do that I would think is crazy.
Sure.
I think that's a normal normal response. Yeah, I didn't know if I would climb again. It took a month and a half to regain my sight. But the most therapeutic thing was actually getting back in the mountains. That was that comfort. I needed that. Later that year, I'd done Rainier and some other stuff that year as well, but I went down and climbed the highest peak in Antarctica that November, following my Everest year. So yeah, it's one of those things. Like, I'm wired that way, and anyone else would be like, man, listen to God. He's telling you to stop climbing. Yeah. And maybe I'm not that smart, but I'm not claiming to be. But it is, that's who I am, and that brings me comfort.
Was it different the next times that you've continued to? I mean, even 9 years later, when you're climbing, than it was going down Everest in terms of faith guiding you? Knowing that the Holy Spirit's with you, just knowing that the Lord is right there. Is it a different experience spiritually for you now, certainly, than it was when you were coming down Everest?
Yeah, I think we go through life and we may not have such a tangible experience of faith like I had, or maybe we do and we don't give credit. And I think that's probably more of the truth, because I'm sure I've had tangible experiences, but just not to the magnitude of you're either going to live or you're going to die. Call out to me, surrender to me. And yeah, it's definitely changed my perspective. Like, I've been a Christian, I've had my walk of faith, and it continues to grow. But to have this experience and then to be forced on the stage, in major news media and, film reenactments and, potential for a movie, a book, it's interesting because even though I had my faith, I was probably not as vocal. And when you're forced on stage in a good way, yeah, it definitely changes, because I could be speaking to a room of, thousands of people. And if it changes one person, it matters. I'm never going to land on every person, but every person is climbing their own Everest or going through some major experience. And we could, pick everyone apart. But all I'm doing is sharing my experience, how I got through it. I'm not expecting anyone to relate to it, but I am expecting everyone to relate to going through something very difficult. So I think my experience on Everest has changed every aspect of every encounter that I do, whether that's in the mountains or at sea level.
So this is kind of a crazy question, but would you do it again if you had this opportunity? Or maybe you have, I don't even know the full story, but would you go back to Everest again?
Oh yeah, I always get asked to do stuff, and, and Everest being one of those. I'm kind of in some areas, a one and done type of guy. Yeah. Even if I was to go back, and if I knew what I knew now, or know what I know now, of course I would have went down with the song. Like, I would never, wish that on anyone, especially myself. I'm very fortunate to be alive. So I would say if I would like to go to base camp and bring my kids and my family. They've climbed the highest peak in Australia when they were like 5 and 8. So they got to have these cool experiences. But I have no intentions to go back at this point.
Yeah,
there's lots of events out there.
I was thinking there's probably other ways to get that high or to get that experience going. You mentioned the book. You even mentioned the word movie. So Blind Descent, the book, came out 2014. Movie, maybe? What's going to happen with that? Is there a possibility that there could be a movie made about this? Because it certainly sounds like a movie when you tell the story the way it's told.
Yeah, I've met with different movie producers in the past, and I think if I'm to agree with a movie, like, I'm okay if there's no movie. It's my life, and I love my life, and Sure. That's fine. If a movie helps lead others to Christ or help them in whatever way that they're struggling, then I think that's such a blessing and very humbling. But it would have to be done well, not a cheesy climbing movie or whatever it could be. So, yeah, I mean, anything's possible. I know my agent, Working Title Agencies, would love to do a movie at some point. It has to be the right fit, the right timing. And I don't know, do they even make movies anymore? COVID?
For Netflix and Amazon, maybe. I don't know if we'll ever be able to go to a movie theater again. I hope so, but Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
me
know.
too.
Well, it's definitely movie material, that's for sure, Brian Dickinson. And we're glad you're alive. We're glad you're here to tell your story. We're glad that God got the glory, which is the whole point of our show and telling it. My last question for you, because 2020, you mentioned 2020 and the pandemic. What's God shown you and taught you this year? What's he been teaching you? What's the great lesson recently that the Lord has impressed upon your heart here as we close down 2020, as we hit the end?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's patience, and it's okay to have downtime. I don't do well with downtime as much. I mean, I live in a beautiful place and I can escape, but we're all in the house together, just like everyone else. And I think it's just that patience, and this too shall pass, and take the most of it, because having this time with the family, I mean, we're not going to get this back. Hopefully we never have to go through something like this again. So while we're here, I'm just taking advantage and just love it as much as I can. And if I'm going a little stir crazy, I escape, I go for a hike, and yeah.
Can you go for a 2-mile hike, like just a regular 2-mile hike, or is it, be just knowing how you've done these incredible accomplishments in Mount Everest and all of these, places in the continents and the highest peaks. Can you just go for a 2-mile hike, or is that for you a 2-mile hike like me going for a walk down the block and back?
Yeah, it doesn't really feel like I'm getting much exercise if it's too small, and it's kind of pointless. If you're going to go out, you might as well go out.
Sure.
Kind of like that. But I don't know, just if you can stop and look around, like not just look at the trees turning colors, but I mean, really look at them. It's almost nostalgic, brings you back to that childhood of when you could just go outside and just stare and learn. So maybe I'm getting older and just coming back to that, or, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know, trying to make it work.
No, that's good. He is Brian Dickinson. And again, the book is called Blind Descent. It is available on Amazon or everywhere books are found, released in 2014. You can read more about his story. But man, that's just one of the crazier stories you'll ever hear. And like I said earlier, we're glad you're here to tell it, Brian. Thanks for joining us, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much.
What a story that was from Brian Dickinson, author, speaker, adventurer, survivor. I think that's an appropriate word here for Brian, climbing the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, living to tell about it, descending down Mount Everest and getting snowblind, which is just incredible, losing his vision for over a month. And here he is telling his story almost 10 years later on Sports Spectrum. Brian's a great follow on Twitter. You can give him a follow there. He's at Brian C. Dickinson. You can give him a follow, then get his book as well. It's called Blind Descent. It's available everywhere books are found. And then his website is briandickinson.net to learn more. briandickinson.net. Thanks to Brian for joining us. Thanks for his incredible story. You can actually read a 7-day devotional that he wrote. I think he mentioned this in the podcast as well, at least in our conversation, on YouVersion, the Bible app. So if you go on the Bible app and you search Brian Dickinson or Blind Descent, you can do a Bible 7-day devotional on Brian's story. So we really appreciate him joining us today on Sports Spectrum. Incredible guy, and grateful for him joining us today on the show. We also appreciate our sponsors and partners today, Compassion International, doing a great initiative right now called Fill the Stadium. You need to go check them out at fillthestadium.com and give and donate and help release these children from poverty, these children and their families who are in crisis. fillthestadium.com. Also, Water Mission, thankful to them as well for being great partners and sponsors today on Sports Spectrum. Check them out at watermission.org as they fight the global water crisis, stopping the global spread of COVID-19, urgently needed safe water, sanitation, hygiene solutions to refugee settlements and other vulnerable communities. Check them out at watermission.org. You can also check out our website, sportspectrum.com, and you can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. Love to hear from you on anything you want to talk about. Just some thoughts on Brian Dickinson's story. It's an incredible one. You can reach me, jason@sportspectrum.com. And lastly, I want you to think about this podcast, whatever app you're listening to it on. Click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. And then I want you to think about listening to our other shows. See, we have a podcast network now, the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. We got all sorts of different shows right now. We have a Football Sunday show that you can listen to. We have this Sports Spectrum show, the flagship one, of course. And then we have a couple of shows that are unique and different, including Table 40, hosted by Matt Holliday, the former MLB All-Star and World Series champion, and his wife Leslie, as they interview couples in the world of sports, a husband and wife couples, and talk to them about the intersection of sports and faith, parenting, coaching, playing, all of those type of topics available at Table 40. And then a brand new podcast that we just launched November 19th called Recalibrated, hosted by Mallory Brown, who is the wife to Donald Brown, the former NFL running back. Mallory leads our women's ministry here at Sports Spectrum and Pro Athletes Outreach. And Mallory has some amazing connections, an incredible heart to serve, and a really great idea here with Recalibrated, which is based off of Romans 12:2. So go search Recalibrated, go subscribe to Recalibrated and the Recalibrated podcast, and listen to her talk to the women in pro sports and the wives of these NFL and Major League Baseball and all the different sports, the wives and the girlfriends. Mallory talks to them. On her first couple episodes, she had on Sarah Hasselbeck, who's the wife of Matt Hasselbeck, and Tamala Davis, who is DeMario Davis's wife from the New Orleans Saints. And it's a really unique story and unique show because we don't hear from the wives too often. We don't hear from the women behind the successful athletes that you watch on TV. And Mallory's going to tell those stories, those unheard, untold, recalibrated stories on the brand new Recalibrated podcast, available now everywhere podcasts are found. Make sure you go subscribe right now. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. My name is Jason. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.